going to talk about mastering the support and resistance bounce trade. Some people might call this a support and resistance retest. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to identify an appropriate support and resistance level. Then we're going to talk about the setup itself and what I look for. And then we're going to go to some charts and we're going to play through a couple of these setups that actually occurred today on S&P 500 futures. Starting out, I'm just going to cut over to my trading view here. It's a little bit easier to draw so we can talk about what I look for. And I just want to point out that TradingView does not currently have a good cumulative delta indicator. We are going to talk about the cumulative delta with this trade as one of the ways we can increase our win rate. So when we go to the actual trades on live charts, we're going to be looking at NinjaTrader, which is the platform and broker that I use, which does have cumulative delta, as most good futures platforms do. So first things first, let's just talk about how do we identify a good support and resistance level. So let's say this is price, and when we're talking about support and resistance, all we're really talking about is generally a horizontal area in the market where price has reacted to in the past. So something like this. Now, what we really want to look for here is multiple reactions. So I generally do not take support and resistance breakouts or bounces if there has only been one reaction to a specific price level. I'm generally looking for at least two before I draw my level. And very commonly with support and resistance bounce plays, you will have a reaction on either side of the level. What rarely happens with these, let me get rid of this for a second. What rarely happens would be that we've had one reaction, two reactions, and then I take the third from the same side. Probably not going to be taking this. So we had our two touches, which is when I would identify this level, but I'm probably not going to take this one. What may occur more commonly is I have one, two, a breakthrough, and then take this. Sometimes I'll even take the second one from this side. And occasionally it's just going to be something like this. One, break, first retest. Now I have my level to identify, and then second retest would be the one I take. So I'm almost always taking like the third test of one of these levels, but rarely if it's been the third test in a row from the same side. So just to sort of recap, all we're really talking about here with support and resistance are vertical price levels. And for me, what I'm looking for is at least two touches. We can draw our zone or level. I almost always do a zone because very rarely are those touches going to be like the wicks end at exactly the same price. So I usually draw a zone from the wicks, wherever that sort of gives me. And then what I'm looking for is that third reaction, okay? Very, very simple. Now, of course, one way that we are going to make this all make a lot more sense is by looking at multiple time frames. And the other way that we're going to really increase our win rate is by looking at the cumulative delta. So let's switch over to my NinjaTrader, and we can take a look at both of those things right now. We're going to look at two specific setups that played out today. Okay, so here we are on NinjaTrader, and this is from today, October 18th. So one thing I want to point out, and obviously I have all of my drawings on this chart already, but notice overall, this is a 50,000 tick chart. It's very similar to, like, you could look at a 1 hour chart, very similar. And notice that we're in a big old range here, like real big old range, okay? Now, are we in an uptrend, downtrend? Really hard to say. Like here, we were kind of going down, then we poked up and made a new high, made another new high, but now we're making these sort of, lower highs and lower lows. Things were looking a little bit sketchy here. But that's overall where we are within this sort of range. At this very moment in time, we are making a low, a lower high, and a lower low. So if I were a betting man, I would be going into my smaller time frames and looking for short trades just based on this. It is worth paying attention to any sort of major areas of support and resistance that you might see. So one thing that I just see going into today that I want to point out are we have this area down here. So it's this last major swing before we had this bullish impulse. And you can see we had a touch here, a touch here, and a touch here. So 3 touches. So again, I need at least 2 to mark off a good support and resistance level. The other thing I want to point out is yesterday morning, which is right here, we had this consolidation. And if we draw a profile, what we'll see is that there is a little high volume node inside of there that's worth paying attention to. Now, I already drew that line on my chart right here, right about this 73.25. So you can see this little, if you look at yesterday's price action, this little V shape, the HVN was right here. And this squiggly line is also an anchored VWAP from the major swing low, which kind of lines up with that same area. So there's a bit of support down there that I do want to be aware of. That's going to affect like how girthy of a target I might want to go to here. But overall, looking at the high time frame, we are making lower highs and lower lows, although it is within a larger sideways market and it is within this last bullish impulse. Moving down to my intermediate time frame. On this intermediate time frame, what do we see? Well, again, we see very clear lower highs and lower lows. Okay, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. We have lower highs and lower lows. And now, what are we looking for when we start setting up for this trade? Well, we're looking for areas where the market has reacted to more than once that could be support and resistance for us. And right out of the gate, what I see, and we'll see this more clearly in our lower time frame as well, is this last sort of swing high here, right? That whole area goes way back into yesterday. And we can see we had a reaction here. We tried to probe below it and then immediately broke back up and then reacted again, and then broke through, tested again from the underside, and then came down. And this happened in the pre-market. Now, one thing that I'm always looking for on these support and resistance bounce trades, and this is going to drastically improve your win rate, is looking at the cumulative delta and looking for divergences. Specifically, we're looking for the delta to sort of lead price a little bit here. So if we're looking for a short trade, which is kind of what I've got my eyes on here, if price can come up, hit this zone, and go down again, I want to see that cumulative delta is moving lower at a faster rate than price is. That's the kind of divergence we're looking for. So take a look at, for instance, this sort of area right here, this wick. And, you know, as we come up into this sort of area right here, oops, okay? And if we look at that on the delta, this wick was here on delta, and on this last sort of test, see how the delta has moved down significantly on this first retest, and price has moved up. Now, that alone would actually make this test here a valid support and resistance bounce. However, that occurred pre-market, and I do not trade pre-market, but that was actually a news release move right there. Okay, I think there was some housing starts or something right there. But overall, what we're looking for on this intermediate time frame is, what is the trend? The trend is down. So the high time frame and the intermediate time frame are in alignment, which gives us a lot of confluence. And then I'd really like to use a 2000 tick chart for these entries when I'm scalping. And here we're going to see a few things a little bit more clearly. So before we continue, what I want to do is I want to play through the price action till we get right up into the point of the entry. So a couple things that I want to point out that are really enticing for me about this particular trade. So the first thing is I always look at the point that we broke through the level. So if we look at kind of where that was, right around here, let's call it this candle, and look at that to where price is retesting this zone. And again, where is that candle on delta? It's way up here. And look at how far delta has fallen from that point. Now, even if we want to look at more recent price action, okay, here to here, we can see price again has fallen. So that's, again, very good confluence on the delta. And then with even more recency, if we look at this last swing high right here, this is the big one to me, that big push up. And if we look at our delta, certainly didn't go up, kind of flat, but actually slightly down. So these kinds of divergences on delta are exactly what I'm looking for, and they can really, really increase your win rate on these particular trades. So that's basically what I'm looking for. And now for my entry, there's a few different ways you can enter. Again, my preferred way to enter, and I'll show you a couple options here. My preferred way to enter would be to wait for a breakdown of both price and delta. Now, one thing you'll see right away here, let me zoom in on this. This little red bubble, this is within NinjaTrader. If you have their order flow package, this is the large trade detector. So what this is telling me is that over 400 contracts were traded all at once right here. So it was a big block of trades. And look at the delta, how that just really dropped. So right away, like if you wanted to, the close of this candle, like you could absolutely just take that trade right there. Now my minimum risk to reward is 1.5 to 1. You could go for taking out the lows. You might look at this and say, there's this kind of zone down here. Maybe that's your target. That would be a really reasonable price action based target. And let's play this through and I'll show you how the other entry options look. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Okay, so the second entry option that I might take, and this is actually the one that I looked at today, was actually right here. So this first candle, after this kind of initial push, this first candle where price kind of confirmed the delta. Because sometimes you get these big trades and it's a battle going on and you get this doji and it's indecision and then it breaks to the upside. So personally, the more comfortable trade for me was to wait for the price and the delta to sort of confirm each other. And you can either do a tight stop right over the entry bar, which is actually often what I will do. Some people might prefer a more conservative stop, which is over the swing high itself. So lastly, another entry option would be to wait for like a micro lower high to occur after the initial rejection. What I mean by a micro lower high is if you look sort of within the candles, what you see here is actually like a high, a low, a high, a low, a high, a low, a lower high, and then a lower low. So this first lower high, this would be the other entry option, would be after we came down and then back up, and then once we come back down again and break that, that would be your other entry option with a stop right over that little micro swing high. So all of those entries would have been viable. All of them would have worked to give you at least a 1.5 to 1 reward to risk. And you certainly can go for a bigger reward to risk on these. You can go for 2 to 1. You can do a price action based target. And you can see like price actually sold off pretty nicely after that little move. That's exactly what we're looking for. You can see delta continued to sell off. So that's the first trade. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, guys, so here we are. It's the same day. And this is where we just showed that first trade. Now, one thing I want to point out here, and this wasn't a trade that I actually caught today or saw until actually right now. But again, look at where the delta is on this last touch. Delta is here. On this touch, delta is here. And again, this is the 2000 tick chart. You take your entry when price and delta break down together. Of course, if you're just doing price action, this is an engulfing candle. But if you want to add the delta in, it really helps. And you get the easy 1.5 to 1. Again, you could have gotten a 2 to 1. You could have gone, again, down to this area where the market has shown a lot of support throughout the previous kind of little bit of time. That would have been a fine target as well. And either way, all of that would have worked. Okay, but here's the second trade that I wanted to actually show you. So just for clarity's sake here, let's start with our higher time frame because this is very important. So we're going to go to the 50,000 tick. Again, what do we see? We see very clearly lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. So again, we are in a downtrend. This particular trade was a little sketchy for me, and I actually did not take this one. And I'm going to show you why. So notice I had identified this previous support and resistance area right here based on these touches. And you can see price was really approaching it. Now, the cumulative delta on this large time frame is very bearish. So I probably could have anticipated this breaking a little bit. You know, the low of this whole range is way down here, and maybe it looks like we're going to come test this. The other thing about that, this pink line here, let me make this a little brighter for you guys to be able to see. So this magenta line is high volume node from this consolidation right here. And that was a pretty significant consolidation. It led to this big rally. If you're a supply and demand trader, it would be right inside of this demand zone. And when we break through those high volume nodes on the volume profile, and then we retest them from the other side, that can often be a very powerful trade. So you can see that that's exactly where this high volume node is. We're in a downtrend on the high time frame. We go to our 10,000 tick, which is the intermediate time frame. Again, high time frame you can use an hourly instead of the 10,000 tick. You can very much use a 5-minute chart. And what do we see? We see that price had been trending down through the overnight. It tried to start making higher highs and higher lows, and then ultimately failed, selling off with very strong selling on the delta. So now again, we see that the higher time frame is in a downtrend, the intermediate time frame is in a downtrend. This is our support and resistance area. You're going to see it more clearly on the lower time frame, but you can see we had this touch here, and then there was a small bounce right here on the low time frame you'll see as well. And that this is going to be our second touch. And it's also this big HVN, which gives it confluence. Again, that magenta line is the high volume node, which gives it that confluence as well as a support and resistance, because high volume nodes often act as support and resistance. So what do we want to see? Well, let's look at these last touches. This touch here to where we are now is from here to here. So again, price action, if anything, slightly up, but basically horizontal, whereas the delta, very clearly down. That's what we want to see to give us increased confluence on this and improve our win rate. And we'll see this one more clearly on the low time frame in a second, but we look at the breakthrough level, the breakout point, and where was delta at that breakout point compared to the retest. Let's go down to our low time frame and take a look at that. So on this low time frame, you can see a little bit more clearly reaction here, and then actually, as we broke down a little bit, we kind of came up and reacted to this area right about here as well. Okay, I actually took a trade in here. I took a little scalp on the way down as we broke through this. And the reason why, again, look at this selling delta. Look at where we broke through this area. So if we take it from this wick, we broke through on this bearish candle right here. Look from that bearish candle to where we are now. Let me zoom in on here for you so you can see more clearly. I can get rid of some of these circles as well. So from that breakthrough of the bottom of this zone to where we are now, and then where does that leave us on the delta? I got to move this to even get it on the chart. So this candle's low or close on the delta is right here, and this is where we are now. Oops. So very clear delta divergence. Again, that is exactly what we are looking for to enter these trades. Again, you're going to have a couple entry options. So as we begin to play forward, the first thing I'm watching for is a breakdown of both price and delta together. That's going to be the sort of aggressive entry on these trades. Okay, so that first breakdown of price and delta for me happens on this candle right here. So entry would be right there. Again, I just usually put my stop, one tick above the high of my entry candle, but you can also put it above the swing high if you prefer to be more conservative. You can see price moved down, closed at the low, delta moved down as well. Okay, so that's a really nice little entry, and that looks pretty good to me. So the other thing I want to point out, again, look at from this little swing high right here of that wick, price moved up. Look at where we are delta-wise, definitely not moving up. So again, just additional confluence. Now, just like before, there is also generally a less aggressive entry, but of course usually will not give you as good of an entry price. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for sort of the first confirmed lower high. So we want to maybe be aware of this little micro low that occurred right there, okay, right at this wick. And we just broke that. So we made a little micro lower low as we broke that, but we're going to wait for the lower high. We'll see when that occurs. So at this point, I'm seeing this little lower high here. I would probably be placing an entry order underneath these candles. And as long as nothing else changes, if price comes down and trips that in, that would be my more conservative entry. There we go. So we'd be triggered into that. And let's see how this trade plays out. There it goes. Okay, so obviously both targets get smashed at 1.5 to 1 reward to risk. So relatively simple trade setups, but of course, as with everything when it comes to trading, it is simple but not easy. It takes a long time to train your eye to be able to spot these things in real time, but if you can properly identify the support and resistance levels, you can look for that third, possibly even fourth touch of the level. Look for the delta divergence if you're using a platform with cumulative delta. It is so powerful for these trades, and then you can enter. I do want to give you one last little nugget of wisdom when you're taking these trades, because very often on this low time frame, you are actually going to be kind of counter the momentum, right? This is not a momentum play, like really it's a pullback. So you're sort of against that pullback. That if you're using a time-based chart, like this 30-second chart here, do not look or wait to see volume confirmation on these. On these types of bounce plays, the volume usually comes in after the move is already underway. If we look at that on these other touches back here, you can see there was a lot of strong volume going into this as it came up to the touch. And you can see that the selling volume was not very strong as we bounced. Same thing on this one. This was the first one that I showed you guys. Again, look at how the volume was very strong going into the touch, and the selling volume did not appear very strong. So if you're not using cumulative delta, I do expect to see the delta kind of move aggressively in the direction of my trade, but otherwise just stick to the price action. Do not let the low volume throw you off, because very often on these bounce trades, you don't get volume confirmation until it's too late. Like if you look at this last move, volume's coming in right here at the end of the move. You should get volume confirmation, by the way, on breakouts. See this breakout candle with high volume, but on these bounces, if you're waiting for volume, you're often going to miss your entry. So I just wanted to give you that little nugget of information. It's super helpful. And other than that, guys, I hope you have a great trading day, and I will catch you in the next video. Please, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to hit like, leave me a comment, and subscribe.